Well, and it's funny. Like, I was hearing a conversation about even just the word podcast.
Yeah.
How antiquated it is for what the technology is.
Nobody knows where it came from.
Well,
iPods.
That's it. Somebody had suggested it's because it's from the original iPods, and we're so beyond that we're still really podcast. If I had to give it a synonym or a new definition, it would be independent content. That's really all it is. Yeah. Like, Netflix can try to get in podcasts all they want. Whatever they create is not going to be the spirit of what it means to be a podcast today. I think
that's true. Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting world traversing it. Admittedly, I do think there's a system stacked against people that are different talking and bonding, creating relationships. In lieu of that, I try so hard to keep myself grounded. Yeah. I'm not shadow banned. I'm just making bad content. But at the truth of like in 2020, if you look at my analytics, the day like March, if you've now known me enough in this afternoon to get what the spirit of what I'm trying to do is, and if that's what this is, this for the first time in world history, they stop humans. They just stop the world. I don't know how you live that and not talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, if that is the goal and the spirit of everything I'm trying to do here. And whether that's like Socrates, maybe criticizing the powers that be, or maybe even funneling or fueling the narrative you want, they now, with the perspective of time, we look back at that and YouTube flat out says, oh yeah, if you said the word, period, you were sunk. And so you're trying not to let that
you're thinking about the algorithms instead of the content.
Yes, and you can't do that.
But some people do it with the science, and I am totally against it. Also, once you really get into it, you notice all the numbers are not accurate. None of the numbers are accurate. And I don't know what's going on, but there's definitely some sort of collusion between there are these podcasting groups like Parcast and other things like that gobble up a bunch. They'll hear independent podcasts they like, and they're like, come join us, we'll handle all the advertising, we'll handle your numbers, you'll just get a check, you just have to put out content. I did that once, and I will never, ever go. And it was only like 3 months, and I realized that they were inflating their numbers. I was getting higher numbers, but I could tell I wasn't getting more listeners. I don't know where those numbers were coming from.
I'm noticing with YouTube, I'm doing YouTube promotions. Subscribers are blowing up. Definitely not transferring over to real viewers. Yeah. So again, I'm probably drumming up bots. I imagine they have a sophisticated algorithm to isolate potential bots. And I think on the flip, here's what I think. It's a two-way road. I think on the back end, you have these companies, Chinese companies, whatever, that make bots, Russian bots, whatever they are. Mm-hmm. I have a bot farm that I can now sell you 1,000 followers, 1,000 likes. Like you've gotten those advertisements before. And so I think on one end you have a market of people that create bots, but then also you have the platform, the social media companies that, for the sake of promoting to their investors, they have an incentive to eliminate bots. So I think they've spent the last 15 years creating highly sophisticated ways of isolating the bots. I think on the flip end, the bots needed to get more sophisticated. Yeah. And I think they've created bots that do rudimentary interaction. Mm-hmm. They just like random things. They follow random things just to keep it alive. And so I think YouTube isolates these alive accounts that are nothing and just feed your videos to them, get your likes or your follows, but it's really nobody.
I would disagree with you on one thing there. and I think it makes it a little dirtier, is that I think these podcasting groups and companies, their incentive is not to get rid of the bots. Their incentive is understanding it and hide them and pretend they're real, because that gets them, they can go to advertisers and say, look, come with us. We can, your ad will be heard by 1 million listeners. Maybe 100,000 of those are real. They know they're not real, but they can't get as much from the advertisers. Eventually, the advertisers, somebody in that group is going to figure it out, and it's just going to blow up. And I don't want to be anywhere associated with anything that could fall down, because all the, at least in the true crime space where I pay attention to this stuff, the ones that are at the top are putting their finger on the scale in that way. So,
and we also learn with Twitter. What happens when we finally look behind the curtain? You're like, how do they evaluate the value of Twitter? Based on its users, based on its engagement. And if you pull back the curtain, half of them are bots.
Yep.
You've hyperinflated the actual value of...
Have you ever heard of the dead internet theory?
Yes. And that's what close. I think we're very close. And how long until we're all standing back watching just the dead internet interact with itself? And then wait until you throw AI in there.
Yeah. Oh, it's already happening. Yeah. For sure.
All right, you ready to get this thing cooking?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I love that term, think tank. Think tank. You know what a think tank is? Like, how's a think tank go, James?
Yeah, they got cancel culture nowadays. You gotta watch what you say. It's getting real scary out here.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know if I can take the conversation here, but we might as well. It's the Rethink Tank. Looks like you had a little bit too much to think here in the Rethink Tank. Hey, what's going on, everybody, and thanks for joining me again. We are back in the studio, and I couldn't be more excited because we are debating the philosophy of crime. I've got a really special guest with me today. I have the author, investigative journalist, producer, and director, James Renner, and I couldn't be more excited to break it down. He's from the podcast Philosophy of Crime, Syynth Sleuths, and True Crime This Week, but he also has written the books True Crime Addict, Little Crazy Children, The Man from the Primrose Lane. I've got The Great Forgetting here and many more, so be sure to check it out after we wrap. Don't stop this great podcast. But without further ado, let me introduce my great guest, James. Thanks for joining me, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me on. This is fun.
I'm very excited because I think we're of course going to solve all the issues of the world today. So,
of course.
So with that being said, I think the perfect launch pad to an entire dialogue on the philosophy of crime would be this. Is punishment primarily about deterrence, rehabilitation, or retribution? And what really should it be versus the reality of how it plays out?
Yeah, sure. No, first of all, I'm very happy to be talking about the philosophy of crime. Normally, I talk about a cold case. It's very sad, but the whole reason I do this podcast, once a year I do 6 episodes per season, is to talk about these issues and that the big questions behind true crime, which is what you're getting at with the first question and about how we treat criminals in the United States. And to answer your question, we say that we treat criminals, the way we treat criminals and the way we operate the criminal justice system is for deterrence. So we put somebody away so that the next person that is thinking about robbing a grocery store or something will say, oh, but he went away for 10 years. I don't want to go away for 10 years. It'll be a deterrence. There's so many studies that show that that's not true. Even though we're saying that, what people really, the majority, unfortunately, I think of voters want to get behind is retribution. The common person is looking at it as retribution. They've done something wrong. Somebody stole from me. Somebody hurt me. They need retribution, and this is going to be their punishment. We're going to take away their freedom, and there's not a more, in my opinion, there's not a more harsh punishment than taking away a human being's freedom to do what they want to do, to go where they want to go during the day, and lock them in a small little cell. So they look at it as retribution. But when we set it up originally, it was for rehabilitation, which is why we didn't call them prisons. We called them reformatories.
Yeah.
And we slowly gotten away from calling them reformatories because that's not how most people want to look at it anymore.
That's a great point. And I like the way that you approached the question, because initially when I was kind of stirring over it prior to you getting here, is punishment primarily one of the three: deterrence, rehabilitation, or retribution? I was going to say, in the reality, it is retribution. What we shoot for, exactly how you diagnosed it, is deterrence.
Yeah.
But really what it should be is rehabilitation. In one of the podcasts I was listening to, ironically, on the way here, there was a deep conversation you presented about understanding a lot of the person's environment has made them what they are.
Yeah, I think so.
And that's a universal truth. And it comes back to, nature versus nurture and that fun balance we've been wrestling with forever. But I think one more than the other is predominant. And it is all of these interactions you've had in your life has sculpted you into the character that you exclaim to be today, knowingly or unknowingly. In lieu of that, though, there's a bit of a dilemma. I want to see if you can answer for me. Aside from our whole debate we're going to have here about just crime, this is something I've genuinely wrestled with, and I don't think I've found an answer. You are the culmination of your experiences, the way you were raised. Personally, I think white skin is way less of a privilege today than it is just having two parents that care about you. Regardless of how you look, that is going to give you a leg up over anything.
For sure.
And so in a world where you don't have that, and that element's what's crippling you, and maybe you just, a scenario, you had a drunk father that beat you all day. That was out of your control. That is what's kind of created these negative characteristics impacting you and the community around you today. But at what point does that become your responsibility? Is it at 15? Hell no. Is it 25? I don't know. We might be getting closer there. Is it 30? At some point, you got to be your own man. And then at 50, your dad's dead. So, at some point, it's you got to step up. So that's something I haven't found an answer to. But can you help me try to investigate that? At what point do you look at a person and go, yes, it was the longest road. You were a fetal alcohol syndrome baby, and you were dealt a deck from the beginning that was going to bury you.
Yeah.
But at some point, you got to be an autonomous person held to the responsibility of your impact on the community.
Yeah, what ultimately where that conversation gets to is the concept of free will, and if anybody really has it, because there's a lot of evidence to show that environment plays an overwhelming role in the criminals that end up in prison. And did they really have a choice if they were raised by these abusive parents that taught them that in order to eat, they had to steal the food that they wanted to eat? I'm thinking of people like Ted Bundy, for example, who was, nobody really knows who his dad was. It could have even been a relative. He grew up in a very abusive, scary place, and then goes on to continue that cycle of abuse. And then you've got a lot of these serial killers that are in prison now suffered from traumatic brain injuries at some point. The son of Sam, hurt his brain, 3 times before the age of 15. That certainly played a part in what he did. So are they really responsible? Is Ted Bundy responsible for his actions? Is son of Sam responsible for his actions? What I've gotten to, the older I get and the more stories I hear about this, I really, I don't know that I believe in free will anymore. And if you don't believe in free will, you can't hold them responsible for their actions. So, but you got to do something. What do? You remove them from society, these dangerous people. But does that have to mean a 6 by 9 foot cell? Wouldn't they be better served? Wouldn't we be better served to remove them and put them in a place where they could be comfortable and not harm people and go about their day and maybe find a way to contribute to society like Ed Kemper did, the serial killer from the 60s and 70s, who went on to voice a lot of audiobooks that you might have listened to over the years. That's what he did in prison, and he gave back a little bit. Once he was removed, he was able to show some sort of potential. But the older I get, the less I believe in free will, and then you got to, how do you hold somebody responsible?
So... only because we're in the spirit of philosophy today. I haven't drummed this up in a while, but this is one of my favorite theories. I'm sure you're familiar with determinism.
Yeah.
So I am a heavy believer of determinism, and it's because I'm going to find this quote that I can read it to you, but I think we kind of dance around. Determinism plays on the necessity of the illusion of free will, that you don't actually have free will, but there needs to be this illusion that you have choice. If you knew that you didn't have choice, you wouldn't be an actor. So the way to compel you to be an actor is to have you convinced that you have free will, but truthfully, it's all been predetermined. Yeah. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
So the spirit of the quote that I won't be able to find because I want to find it is how every breath, every death, every thought, every action, every quantum explosion, every instance that has ever occurred has led to this moment. What will you do with this moment? And it's supposed to, be this, a promotive type of quote. But I love reading it because it has such a real impact, or such a real tone to it. Every love, every heartbreak, every life that arose, every death that occurred led to this moment. Yeah. And so when you look at somebody like Ted Bundy, maybe, potentially if his uncle was his dad, maybe if, whoever was in charge, whoever raised his uncle showed him moments of passion or compassion, or there was a teacher in his life, an idol, an icon, somebody. It could have changed everything. Could have changed not only his life, but those that preceded him. And so I guess this comes back to how Socrates presents it. Knowing that, does it change anything for us? I mean, really, you still know that you need to have that delusion of free will.
Yeah.
And it I don't know.
I don't think everybody needs that delusion. I think the masses need that delusion of free will in order to feel at ease. But I don't think I need it anymore. Right. And
fair. If you think on these things long enough, you grow a muscle.
But also, I still feel guilty if I say something that hurts somebody else's feeling, as if I have a choice, which I want to think that I do. It's a lovely thought. But again, you look at, everything that happened in history, all the, the random events and all people's behaviors leading up to this 1 second, that doesn't convince me that any of them had any sort of free will. And Fair. We're just, we're in one of those Rube Goldberg machines, and it's my job to be the ball bearing that jumps over to the next section.
I love that.
But I guess in a way, I still kind of fool myself into believing that that I have some sort of, a little bit of free will, because I still feel guilt. Why would you feel guilt if you didn't have any choice in what you were doing?
Or is guilt kind of the gas in the engine, right? Those emotions are what keep the lights on.
Yeah. And maybe it's emotions that allow for some acts of free will. Emotions. I was just looking into this the last week. And it deals with determinism, where we can plot out how our brains work, it's synapses and chemical reactions and things like that, but we still don't know why feeling is there. We still don't know why emotion is there, because it could all be happening in the dark, like a computer. Computer doesn't feel feelings, but when we process information, we feel emotion. We feel awe when we look at a sunset. We feel guilt when we do something wrong. Why? Maybe that's what provides a little bit of free will. So I'm still open to it, but it's
I do like that.
It's a really cool concept, and what led me to study some of the and to read up on some of that was I was trying to understand. I'm writing a little bit about anesthesia of all things, and how anesthesia works. What we don't understand still is amazing to me, because we're in this modern age with AI and everything, but there's still some basic building blocks that we don't understand. One of them is anesthesia. We don't know how it works. We just know it works. Wow. And it gets into how we can turn off whatever it is that's making ourselves conscious. We figured out how to turn it off, but we still don't know what we're turning off. We don't know what this consciousness is. And it might have something to do with emotions and feelings, things that don't seem to be represented in 3D space. And one of the leading theories in anesthesia these days is that it might be affecting consciousness in there might be another dimension involved, a fourth dimension that doesn't interact with the material world in the same way, and it gets really trippy. But it's all intertwined, with this idea of free will and whether
not to get lost in the weeds, but just to kind of peel at least a layer or two off of that. In one of your podcasts, talking about euthanasia and the death penalty, you go through the details of what that process looks like. And really, it's kind of to play upon your emotions on, even if you're an advocate for the death penalty, let me run you through what you're doing to a person. And it pulls on your heartstrings. But one of the aspects of the euthanasia process itself that you bring up is how you're using one chemical to just shut off their consciousness, to then come in with the next chemical that you say is excruciating.
Yeah.
But because they're unconscious, it doesn't exist to us.
Right.
We don't know if it exists to them or not.
Right.
And we've become so heartless we may not even care. But
to us, it looks like they're falling asleep and having this gentle, ride into death. But in reality, they are suffocating to death on the inside, and it could be agony for them. And probably is.
I'd imagine. And it's not like they can come and tell us.
They just can't scream.
Right.
We figured out a way to kill people and not listen to them screaming.
So that dimension of consciousness, wherever that lies, when it's there or when it's removed, it clearly has its own impact. Do you feel through your ongoing research that anesthesia is doing something with that? It's like the separation. It isn't that it isn't happening. It's just to your consciousness, you have no idea.
Right. The idea is that consciousness resides at least partly in another dimension. And that by, normally that there's a valve in our brains that is open and allows that consciousness to come through and inhabit this body. We figured out a way to turn that valve to the fourth dimension off with anesthesia. So what happens to the conscious mind when it's out? I recently had surgery. I broke my leg. In February, I broke my leg, and I had surgery, and the anesthesia went wrong, which is why I'm interested in this. I'm studying it. I'm writing about it right now, where they put me under anesthesia to do a simple surgery, and I woke up in a totally different hospital with a tube down my throat.
Oh, geez.
So I wake up in a totally different hospital with a tube down my throat, and I look up, and my mother and father are sitting next to each other in this room, and they divorced when I was 3. So I'm like, oh, God, this is serious. And I was ventilated. They had me on a ventilator. And if you've read statistics on ventilators, the odds are
coming back
low, or at least not good. I wouldn't go to Vegas. But everything worked out. I don't know where I went when I was under anesthesia, though.
So let me ask you this, because the playing with this consciousness being in another dimension, I think piggybacks on other phenomenons we experience. Somebody has a near-death experience and they think they went to heaven, or they spoke to Jesus, or they saw their life pass before their eyes. Or what happens when we're dreaming? Where does your mind go when you're dreaming? Could it be that it is in another dimension, and you're just tapping into different experiences? And
I'm fascinated by those questions too, because it's weird when you break it down. Where, like, how weird is it that we slip into a coma for 8 hours a day and go somewhere else that our mind created? That doesn't freak people out. We just learn to live with that. Like, that's bizarre. Why do we do that?
Or what? These are the extra phenomena that we just totally ignore.
Yeah,
like it's just another dream. What happens when you walk downstairs to have your cup of coffee, your daughter walks in and she goes and starts explaining, and you're like, wait, I just had that same dream.
Yeah.
And she's like, I know, Dad, you were there. And you're like, I know, but I did. Like, when you have these shared experiences in this other realm, we just, but what are they? It's just a crazy phenomena. It's like, or there might be something to this, especially when people start breaking down dreams and it's clear that messages are being sent to us, whatever they may be, whether it's you need to correct, find accountability, you need to correct your path, or what you did today was wrong and you should go to apologize to your mom, whatever it could be. Yeah. We're also receiving messages from it. There's a whole psychology of people breaking down other people's dreams and what they could mean. That's a cool. I'm excited to see where you come out on this.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I'll come up with any answer. It's just one of those weird things that we decide to live with.
Interesting. So to shake things up a bit, I also sent you, there's a couple topics that I really want to dive into, because I think where we're going to agree on a lot, there may be some conflict, and of course that's what we live for on a podcast.
That's why this is why I like doing this Philosophy of Crime podcast. Is once you delve into the questions behind what we do on a daily basis, especially when it comes to crime, and you get into that philosophy area, weird things come out of there. Like once you face those questions, you have to deal with some of what's behind the reality of day-to-day life.
So I wanted to bring this up earlier. We got distracted. First, I'm going to give you a little diatribe. As somebody that works in a court, I show up every day wanting to help people. And one of the most discouraging things, especially I'm at a municipal court, so you're at the very local level versus, a federal court where people are committing murders and federal robberies and everything else.
Yeah.
That's a different tier of life.
So probably see a lot of domestic violence cases, DUIs,
even driving under suspension, driving without a license, parking tickets. All of those are at this court. And I don't like speaking in universals, but the majority of people you experience genuinely do not want to help themselves. And this comes back to our question of, like, at what point is it your fault? Like, your mom beat you, but at some point it's your fault. You're 40 and you're still here. Yeah. There was an instance where there was like a 50-year-old man, never had a job, totally leeching on society. And he keeps getting in trouble. He's stuck in the cycle. Yeah. And the judge looked at him and he said, she's like, why don't you have a job? This is after he's been convicted. It's a probation violation. We need to get you a job. Why don't you have a job? And nobody's hiring. I don't want a job, whatever litany of excuses he gives. And she goes, that's just not true. And she's a severe Democrat. So, like, of course, this is not in the vein of, like, she doesn't have empathy. Yeah. She's sitting there going, but that's just not true. There's job opportunities everywhere. Why won't you even consider going to McDonald's? Yeah. And he scoffed. And that instance was really telling to me because, of course, I get it. I get being 55 years old and going, no, I'm not going to work at McDonald's. Yeah. I believe, and this is part of the headache I have when people say we need a raise, McDonald's needs to be a living wage. A society needs to have jobs for 16-year-olds. Yeah. And the problem is you got a 50-year-old doing a 16-year-old's job. Yeah. And, of course, that isn't a livable wage. That's unfortunate. We should probably work to do a better job of making sure that 50-year-olds aren't doing 16-year-old jobs versus making it a livable wage. So one of the things that I'm looking at this gentleman and I go, I totally relate to that opinion of I'm better than McDonald's.
Yeah.
The problem is you ignored a 16-year-old's job at 16, at 26, at 36, at 46, and now at 56, you're rolling your eyes like it's too good for you.
You got to start somewhere.
I had to sell cell phones, and I'd have people screaming at me at Sprint, my phone sucks. And I'm like, I know, dude, we're at Sprint. I don't know what to tell you. At the same time, you got to live those lives. I mean, one, it's a character builder. Like, it isn't just build your resume. It's build you as a person.
Yeah.
Get different experiences. I poured concrete just as much as I was in a building, writing papers and doing work with a collar on. And so
you're going to understand money and how to budget and how to
understand
all that
people.
Without,
I mean, guess what? I look at people all the time at my job now that I'm in charge of people. And it's like, hate to tell you, I don't like any of you, but none of you know that. See the difference between me and you? You need to make her know that you don't like her and you're mean to her and you're upset today.
Yeah.
But you got to get callous, get those callous. You got to build the muscle of working with people that you didn't choose, that you got to cooperate. And then when you're sitting there at 55 and it's time to get a job, one, your options aren't as disappointing as you project them to be. But then also, if you did need to pick up a shovel, that isn't discouraging to you because it's just another gig for you.
Sure.
So I give you my diatribe. That part of the problem is you're dealing with people that you sincerely want to help them more than they want to help themselves. And you live in those moments of just a couple people where it's like every single person, I'm being paid to be here and I'm a civil servant. I want to do backflips for you to get you out of your situation and get you back on the road because really, I'm a liberal like you, but defined differently than Democrats. I don't care who you're fucking or what you're smoking on your property. As long as it doesn't affect me on mine, I'm liberal to it.
Sure.
We should all want that for each other. And so I don't want you robbing the store. I want to get you to a place where you're buying things out of the store and funneling this guy's economy, our local city's economy. But you'd be amazed how you can lead the horse to water, but you will drown it trying to get it to drink.
Yeah, I think though that when you're dealing with that those sorts of people, at least in my experience, is it comes from a lot of things that a lack of education, a lack of intelligence, and also the way that they've been treated. For their lives and looked down on because they haven't been able to land a job, and eventually that shame gets to be too much. They're like, I'm just not even going to deal with it. I'm not going to go out there and look for a job because they've already said I'm not qualified. I think there are plenty of jobs out there, but at the same time, places like Walmart, the places and Amazon that are doing the majority of the hiring, is it a livable wage? I mean, certainly there are jobs, but I don't know if it's a livable wage, especially with housing prices and things like that. So we're at a point with what's going on with AI getting rid of many jobs, and the jobs that are available not really a livable wage, that we really, the conversation that we need to have at some point, probably like 10 years ago, is a guaranteed minimum income, and that scares so many people to even discuss. But I think if you were able to do that to this guy that was like 50, if you had intervened when he was in his 20s, and maybe even had some counseling and occupational therapy and things like this, because I guarantee you there's some sort of mental condition underlying the problem there too. But if we can intervene early and give them some sort of pride, even if it is some small amount, of guaranteed minimum income, $500 to $1,000 a month, just to take some of that stress off, so that they can think about bigger things. I think is where we need to get to.
I can appreciate that position, because I do think, especially if the goal is rehabilitation in any sense, crime or just society, the only way you're going to get members of society to the standard you want them to be is with the proper channels through counseling, therapy, support groups.
The right medication, most
That's
of the time.
a big piece of it. That is genuinely a big piece of it, too. But then at the same time, you have these pharmaceutical companies that are invested in over-prescribing us. Now we've got a totally medicated world. We will circle back to school shootings, but it is wild that all of them are on antidepressants. So it's like, where's the cause and correlation? Is it that they're troubled, so we prescribe it, and then this is just a correlation?
I don't know the I don't know the statistics as far as the usage of antidepressants with mass shootings and school shootings. I'd be interested in taking a look at that, maybe even doing an episode on that in the future. But if there is a high correlation there, my guess out of the gate would be either they're on the wrong medication, because antidepressants are very I could take one medication and you could take another, and we'd have totally different reactions to it. So you have to find out what is meant for you to do. But also, a lot of teenagers tend to not take them as prescribed.
Right.
And especially when you're dealing with antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, you have to take them exactly as prescribed, because, first of all, they take about 6 weeks to fully go into effect and do what they're supposed to do. And two, if you're off by a few hours sometimes on a particular dose. So,
That's true too.
That could be a part of it. It wouldn't surprise me that school shooters overwhelmingly have mental health issues, and so I guess there probably is a correlation with medication. But there's that already underlying depression or anxiety that kind of fuels them into thinking to do what they want to do. My guess is either they were misprescribed or not taking it correctly. But that's interesting. I've never heard of that correlation before.
And that, I think, may or may not become a coming attraction that we investigate further as a society. But I also think there's a lot of mechanisms that will be invested in making sure we don't walk down that road, so they can keep the money wheel turning. So it's a balance. But I do want to get back to, I appreciate counseling, occupational therapy, support avenues.
Yeah.
But I do want to get your thoughts on this. While I agree with you, that being the predominant avenue I'd want to lean on, there is an element to human nature I can't help but exclaim. And it was so foreign to me, I didn't think it was as real as it was. When the pandemic hit, I had your run-of-the-mill, blue-collar, white-collar friends that grew up in the same well-off community I did. They had high school education. They went off to college. And I'm telling you, James, what blew my mind was the second they could all get free money and play Xbox at home, the motivation of people that were the same as me, that I'm going to be a lawyer. Well, I'm going to be an accountant. Well, I'm going to be... The fact that all of them deflated the moment they could catch a free check and play Xbox all day, it was a piece of human nature that I knew existed, but I didn't think was ever... I didn't think it was you. I didn't think it would be my pal right next to me, that we shared the same motives, the same goals. And so to me, that's the animal brain. That's the part of our animal brain where it's like, but
I didn't see that, and I'm older than you. I'm 46 years old. What I saw, my experience with the COVID relief money was this: we got into COVID, and the first 6 weeks were, I think it put everybody into a depression, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And we separated from each other even more than we normally do. We locked each other, we locked ourselves down. We weren't seeing our parents. We weren't seeing our, some people weren't seeing their kids or grandkids. And that really put us into a funk. But what I was concerned about is, I think if those relief checks hadn't have come,
we'd be even worse off.
I remember walking my dog one day during the height of the pandemic, before the relief money was coming, and thinking, we're only a month away from some looting on a scale we've never seen in history. Maybe it's because, we're the middle class, but what those relief checks really helped were the people that were very destitute and had they lost their jobs because of COVID. They didn't have insurance. They didn't have money coming in through companies that were taking care of their employees. They had zero in their account, and they needed money for food and groceries. And if that hadn't have come, I don't know, I think we would have seen a breakdown of society very quickly. So, maybe
I think you're right.
Maybe the middle.
Well, I think it's the luxury of comfortable people, right? Like you're at a time, you don't have a family, there's no mouths to feed.
Yeah.
So not only do you have the comfort of this period in your life, you're young, but at the same time, you're well off enough, whether your parents, whatever, that you're probably not going to fall on your feet or be sleeping on a sidewalk.
Yeah.
But the only reason I find it noteworthy isn't to degrade how those welfare programs assisted people in need, but how there's a human character trait that can be triggered that I don't think we realize is as prevalent as we do. But like you said, I think it's harder to trigger it because if you really need assistance, you're not looking to take advantage. You're looking to just provide,
but
survive.
There are maybe some people in that mid-range area where are legitimately lazy and just want to smoke weed and play video games all day, and you gave them the opportunity to do so. I'm sure there were, a bunch of people doing that.
So, in lieu of that, I think this is a perfect transition to the topic that I really wanted to initially dissect with you, which is eliminating bonds. Because you present a very strong argument. And the first piece that, of course, really lends me to your side is there is an outspoken burden of proof, which is you are innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
And why are we treating an innocent person like a guilty person?
Yes.
They are in the same concrete box that a guilty person is in. Now, I want to get your thoughts on one piece. That is also, in my mind, balanced with the practicality of its implication. First question I had for you is, well, then how do I get that person to show up back at court?
Right.
And you had suggested monitoring, like ankle monitors.
Sure.
And I went to our chief of probation, and I was like, I got to get your thoughts on this. And he had a similar laugh because he goes, of course, we could get lost in the weeds of funding it and everything else. But in a magical world where we eliminate all the stupid, wasted costs our government does, and we properly allocate it to make this affordable. I don't want to deflate a solid theory based on something as minimal as that. The more practical piece, let me give you a story, because I love how your podcasts operate on real crime stories.
Sure.
We had the Topgolf here in Independence was built, and right when it was built, it wasn't known to the public how expensive it was. The cost didn't deter a lot of the riffraff that would just bleed into that. Independence put this. I'm at the Garfield Heights Municipal Court. This is literally at the border of Garfield.
Okay.
And so you're getting a merge of different personalities and backgrounds. And on the onslaught of its opening, every week, so just to give you an idea, Independence, we only see once a month. That's how much crime they have there.
Okay.
Whereas like Garfield Heights, Maple Heights, we see once or twice a week in comparison. So Independence doesn't have a whole lot of crime, but they do because they're right there on 77, and they have a huge prostitution issue with the hotels right there.
Oh, wow.
Oddly enough. And that's what's so funny. You have this like safe, quaint community, but just that one commercial district by the freeway is all of their crime.
Interesting.
And there was a series of like 7-8 months going through that summer. The crime you'd see at this Topgolf would blow your mind. Just physical assaults, everything. And so there was a situation where a couple, beat these two waitresses crazy.
Oh my God.
and the prosecutor, so they got the conviction, and they're going through the sentencing, and I've never seen the prosecutor do this before. And he goes, Judge, I have to ask you to play the video evidence into the record in the off chance they do go up on appeal, because I've never seen something so gruesome that I genuinely need this evidence to carry with them wherever it goes.
Smart move.
Right? So at sentencing, they play the videos, and it is gruesome. And the picture of these waitresses, it would turn your stomach. You feel so bad for them.
Yeah.
The girlfriend paid her dues. She went on her sentence, and she did what she did. The boyfriend never did anything. And the problem was this was going on during the pandemic. So the county had really weird rules about sending people to jail.
Yeah.
Sending people to jail's on. Now it's off. Now it's on. It was like a switch.
Yeah.
And, well, now only certain crimes. And well, we're only keeping it at half capacity because last week we had a COVID outbreak. It was, we couldn't send anybody to jail. So this guy that genuinely probably should have or would have gone right off the bat has been playing games with probation officers and everything else. We bring him in, and at the very least, he needed to pay restitution. He looked at the judge and said, I have no intention of ever paying that.
Wow.
And again, understand black robe syndrome, the ego of a judge.
Oh, yeah.
You don't get away with saying that to a judge and it not come back and bite you in the butt.
Yeah.
So, of course, now I'm going to make you feel those statements. But before she goes, I respect you're never going to pay restitution. So in lieu of that, we're just going to start your jail sentence today, and that will be encompassed in it. As the bailiffs come to handcuff him, to send him to jail, he, through the table, busted through the bailiff, the one bailiff, books it to the back door where another bailiff, who has to be 400, 500 pounds, goes to throws his whole weight against the door to try to stop him from coming out the door. He busts through that bailiff, puts him on his back. While now two bailiffs the original one that was trying to handcuff him chases him. They're all in the lobby. The other larger bailiff gets off the ground. They're literally chasing him around the lobby. The gentleman goes to the staircase and just jumps down 2 flights of stairs like Spider-Man. Just whoosh, down, right out the door. Before the detectives on the main floor even knew what was going on, they all rushed out after him. He was long gone. Somebody found from a Ring camera up the street, he got in a getaway car and is gone.
Wow. There's
a warrant for him. That was in 2020. This guy is never coming back to our court. And what's funny is they all kind of, the police officers, they all, the different departments, they all know. This guy's in Akron. They know where he's at.
Yeah.
But they're not going to go try to execute a warrant all the way out in Akron.
Why not?
So what you're seeing is how they practically apply these things versus you'll hear the judge say it too. There's no way he hasn't been picked up in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
But you will have an Akron officer go, I'm not driving him to Cleveland,
right,
and just finish what they're doing there and move on.
Yeah.
And so now this kid knows what's going on. He's just never going to leave Akron, and if he does, he's just going to do everything he can not to get caught. So again, I want to volley this to you.
Yeah.
When I bring it to my probation officer about, you don't have to put them in a box, just know where they're at. The whole purpose of bond, they're really not trying to get you and me to come back. They know you and I are coming back.
Yeah.
They know we don't live there. I'm there once,
yeah,
if that, in my life, and I'm going to make sure that I do everything to this never happens again.
Yeah.
So the bond isn't to get you back. It's to get him back. And the probation officer was the one that really, I didn't think there was a way to beat the ankle monitor point because I thought that was very strong. I liked that point. He said those folks, they cut it off instantly.
Yeah.
He's like, those folks are going to cut it off instantly, and those are the ones you really want to know where they're at.
I still think that, well, there are many studies that have been done in countries that don't have bond.
Is Switzerland one of them?
I can't remember, but they have found that the number of people that just don't show up because they don't have that incentive to get their money back is very, very, very low. It's not, and that's the main argument for people that want bond is it forces them to come back. But there's really not enough. There's not really good evidence to show that that's true. And the way that it works here is you get hit with a $10,000 bond. You can pay 10% to a bail's. Most of the people pay 10% to a bail bondsman, and that's money they never get back. Where the whole reason it was set up is you put that money essentially into a kind of an escrow, and when you show up to court, you get that money back. That's not really what happens ever.
They just apply it to your plea.
So I am
right.
totally against that system. It definitely, the people that can't pay that money then are a lot of times incarcerated, and that's where people are sitting in jails where they haven't even been convicted of a crime. We're filling jails up with, the statistics I read, some of these jails are 60% full of people that are awaiting their trial. They haven't even been convicted of a crime. And, our whole system of laws here in the United States hinges on innocent until proven guilty, but we're sure not treating them that way.
So let me ask you this. When I do agree, if you're overriding prisons and we're just stuffing them, that's a problem. But is that problem the result of bonds waiting for their trial? And that could be a piece of it, but what I also think is a predominant piece is the fact that we have privately owned prisons.
Oh, yeah.
That there is a financial incentive to butts in boxes.
Yeah. I don't know why we ever decided to do that, because the incentive is... The way that the prison systems were initially set up, when we called them reformatories, is to get them out as quickly as possible to be functioning members of society. Now it's just filling them up so we can have a full prison, so we get maximize our profits and share them. It's really cruel the way it's set up.
I'm always hesitant to present this crooked position. An even scarier reality, and I implore you could really conquer this as an investigative journalist that does segments like this. I implore you to look into how the same entities that own our private prisons are the same entities that own all the record labels. So it's almost like they're trying to sell a culture that puts your ass right where they make money.
I didn't know that. That
is crazy.
Yeah.
So
everything's owned by BlackRock eventually.
Eventually, you go up far enough. You're right.
Right.
You're very right. Okay, continuing, striking while the iron's hot, though. I do want to get your thoughts on this, because what I do like is you do a lot of international stories, but as a Cleveland boy, a lot of it is rooted in Cleveland, too.
Yeah, sure.
And I think it does a great job of illustrating your point and drawing upon the emotions. But then, and I'm only saying this piece because I want it to degrade my point just as much. I also think using intimate stories as a universality can be dangerous. So I don't want to use this as a universality to define my point.
Sure.
But I'm sure you're aware of Bianca Ellis, the 33-year-old that stabbed the young kid at the Giant Eagle.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know her name, but I heard that story.
So you've got this lady that is boisterous about getting away with murder in California. She then gets picked up in Cleveland, is waiting a cognitive diagnosis to see is she mentally fit, one, to stand trial, but also to just be released into the public and get a cognition test. It being set back just a couple weeks, the judge felt that it would be inappropriate to hold them for that long, to then release her for her to stab a young boy sitting just in the stroller at a parking lot while the child's mother is filling up the car with the groceries.
Yeah.
Just straight up walks up, stabs a kid in the neck. Now, Twitter, I don't know what I've done to my algorithm. It's got me in a really unfavorable place. Because then that day, I see tons more videos of like this type of instance. Just strangers stabbing kids while they're with their mom. It's gruesome. It's insane. And so, keeping us grounded with this specific story, the judge is always going to say, as the judge did, I didn't make a wrong decision, and I would do that. I'd make that same decision again. Why? Yeah. Because if I admit any position of wrongdoing, the sin of this entire situation is on me.
Right.
So out of self-preservation, there's no world, even if you were wrong, you would actually take accountability on it. And again, it's also to protect the system.
Well, do you change the way you do things based on a 1 in a million chance? I mean, I think that probably is part of the judge's argument too. Like, you could have made that decision 1,000 times, and this is the one time that it comes back and gets it. Nobody's completely infallible.
True.
And this is such an extreme example that I think it is, definitely an outlier, and definitely more of a mental health issue, I think, than an issue with the way that it was handled in the criminal system. I think there should, we should be investing more into mental health interventions in places. I mean, she shouldn't have had to wait 2 weeks for some sort of diagnosis. I think that's where the mistake came in. So yeah, was it deferred for 2 weeks because it wasn't available, or I don't know enough about the case.
Sure, and that's fair too. But what I can appreciate is resources. This is a lack of resources. And if we had more resources for ankle monitors, we wouldn't need to put everybody in jail. If we had more resources for, cognitive support and mental health, maybe she's not even in this position, let alone back on the street to do this to a 3-year-old. But I think this also comes back to a point that you raised that Socrates presents. Nobody actually chooses evil. Nobody chooses wrongdoing. It's really either a means to an end, that's a Kant position, or it's you're blinded by the wrongdoing because you're so focused on what you see as right.
Yeah.
And so on the flip side, to me, this doesn't feel malicious. Nothing about this story seems like, the
judge's actions.
I want to, even Bianca Ellis's. I don't know her. I don't know her motive.
Why did she stab the kid? Did she say Jesus told her to do it or something? Or
one, we haven't gotten a narrative from her yet. And it's being kind of protected. On first glance, there's a whole slew of people that are upset. Why wasn't this a hate crime? You love throwing hate crime around. Why wasn't this one of them? I don't think this was that.
Yeah.
And to me, you have a homeless person. If you saw, she's in a wheelchair. So I think you've got a handicapped person that's not only physically limited, they're financially limited, clearly psychologically limited. And I think you just found a person that's tired, tired of looking for their meal tomorrow. And I'm not thinking about the boy. I'm thinking about what the boy gets me. And it's 3 meals a day for the rest of my life. I'm never rolling around in the city. I get to paint. I'll get to read books. I got a medical staff caring to me all day long.
That's interesting.
So to me, this person won. This person won in that she's going to get more medical care. It's a failure of our medical system, right? I agree with all of that. But she's going to get better medical care, housing care. She's going to be more entertained and cared for than if she actually was on the street.
Right.
And I think this was her ticket out of the street.
That's it. That is interesting. That makes sense in something that doesn't make a lot of sense. And also, I can excuse what the judge did, as much as I want, but it's all academic. If I was that kid's father, I'd be suing the judge, I'd be suing the state, I'd be suing the county, I'd be suing her, So
can you, for the listeners that haven't had a chance yet to listen to your podcast, can you flush out that point that you've presented in the past on the emotional versus, I can't remember how you described it, but like the necessary or the righteous?
The best way I can describe that way of thinking actually comes from a West Wing episode. which are great, and people should watch that show. Some great writing in there, especially the first 4 seasons. But
they filmed that at Miami of Ohio, ironically. Did you know that?
I didn't know
that. Yeah, in their business school.
Very cool. There was an episode there where, the president, played by Martin Sheen, his daughter is kidnapped, and he recuses himself as president because he knows that he's got this duty to serve the United States and not use his political position to wage a war on whoever took her. But he knows as a parent, that's all academic, that he will hunt these people down and use any means necessary to exert extreme violence on them. But he has, he does the right thing and steps down as president, and that's when, the John Goodman's character steps in. But I think that illustrates it. We can have these great ideas and how things should work as a society, but when you're the one in the middle directly affected, of course you're going to act emotionally, and you shouldn't be blamed for acting emotionally, and everybody understands that. Nobody's expecting you to say, well, I'm going to stand up and do the right thing, even though my kid was stabbed to death. I know this is a failure of society. Screw that. Get your vengeance.
So let me ask you this. Where do you come out on the law's approach to sentencing a father whose, child was a sexual assaulted victim, or, any of if you're the father of this kid and you act out of that, even just like murder.
Yeah.
The degrees of murder recognize a crime of passion versus a calculated crime.
Yeah.
And the sentences still aren't that disparaging. They're still pretty close. I mean, you killed a person.
Yeah.
But in these types of instances where, admittedly, us as a society lend at least a piece of empathy towards why they did what they did, and many of us, if we were in that position, would do the same exact thing. Do you see it valuable to creating a system that opens the door for loved ones, family members, guardians to express that relief? Or is it still, it's keeping in the academic realm, still important for us to preserve those rules and not find leniency even where we can find emotional justification?
That's a really good question. And there's a specific case that comes to mind out of Florida. There's a Plow Shay. I don't know if that was the perpetrator or the victim, but it was that case specifically involved a boy that was sexually abused, and the perpetrator was caught. But that was when the father found out about the abuse, and he found out where they were bringing him in. They were bringing him back into the county through an airport, and the father dressed up like a reporter and was hanging out at a phone bank. And as they walked the perpetrator by, he turned around, pulled out a gun, shot him in the head, died. And then he dropped the gun and
just surrendered himself.
Surrendered. And he got, I want to say that I think he just got probation out of it. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was captured on video and everything. So they definitely, even if he did serve time, it wasn't much. But as a father, of 2 children, if anybody ever harmed them in that way, I would absolutely exact revenge. And I'd if I was sent to prison, it would be the easiest time I've ever done. As a society, we shouldn't probably be giving them leniency because they still did commit a crime. But I do think we already make that distinction in the law in crimes of passion versus premeditated murder.
Right.
And generally you get a lot less of a sentence if it's a crime of passion, because we understand we're literally insane in the moment and we can't make rational decisions.
Right.
And that gets back to your original point of free will and determinism.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, I think we already kind of weigh that, and there's remedy in law for acting out as human beings will. But it's fascinating.
So, I don't want to just belabor the same point, but there is one other aspect to the bond that I want to dissect with you.
Yeah.
As I conceded, I believe you raised a very strong point, and it's the innocent till proven guilty aspect.
Yeah.
So, of course, we've all heard the cliche 100 times over that you are innocent until proven guilty. Now, this is just me making a theoretical argument. I want to see how you can exercise with it, or wrestle it. If I wanted to make an argument against that piece being an element negating bond, therefore having a defendant give money into an escrow account or whatever to ensure that they show up again. The truth is, now you're not treating them as an innocent person. You're treating them like they're already guilty.
Yeah.
I want to make the argument that the statement innocent till proven guilty is only the exclamation of who has the burden of proof. And the truth is, coming back to a podcast of yours that I didn't get deep enough to listen to yet, that I want to, is reasonable doubt reasonable?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
I want to listen to that.
Yeah.
But it isn't reasonable. But at the same time, to me, I'm a debater. I did debate in high school. I went to states. I went to nationals. I believe I love debating. And when I was in debate, I was like, if I could get paid to do this, that's what I want to do. And that's why I ended up in the field of law. You could say that that's a detriment to us, that truthfully, the right person doesn't win. It's just the better debater, the better speaker, the better presenter, the person that did the more research, whatever the case may be. But also, I got a competitive spirit. So maybe my argument is maybe you just need to show up better prepared next time. You need to make yourself stronger.
Sure.
Beat me. And so I want to present the argument that it isn't, and I think we've socially internalized this the wrong way. It isn't that you are innocent. You're not. In fact, I have enough evidence to show reasonably it probably was you.
Sure.
And you need to show me that everything that I found that is reasonable is inaccurate. But the burden of proof is on the prosecutor.
Yeah.
They need to prove that you are guilty. So it isn't that I'm saying you don't have to prove anything. You're innocent. Oh, no. If you sat there and tucked your tail between your legs and did nothing, inaction is going to defeat you.
Yeah.
You have to proactively defend yourself.
Yeah.
But the burden of proof is not on you. It's on the prosecutor to show that you are guilty.
Yeah.
So I just want to, it felt like a lot of the position negating bond is that principle of, but you're innocent and you're treating an innocent person like they're guilty. And I want to make the exclamation that I don't think that's truly the principle of our system. It isn't that you're innocent. It's that we kind of think you could be guilty. And we're going to bring you into a neutral place. That judge, they're not always going to be. But if they take their existence serious, they should be approaching that room and that bench as neutral as they can. They should, damn it, I know we're human, and I understand what is holding us back. But you should be proactively compartmentalizing your emotions, your political bias, your everything that you've come into that room with, and you are bound by the letter of law, the things in the book, the statutes, the everything that has been passed by those that represent us. And so, in the spirit of that, I found enough things that may make you the perpetrator. I have now taken, and I'm with you. I'm a liberal. I'm a libertarian. So to me, I don't trust the state, but here we have the state intervening. I love the way you open the episode. I think the worst thing that the state could do is intervening on your freedom, isolating you in a box, or intervening on that one principle you are owed. But we're about to do that. So it's the state is reaching in and overextending their authority.
Yeah.
The only way to, one, either justify that or bar them from being able to do it is your innocence. And that will be sorted out in this neutral place. You don't have the burden of proving you are innocent, but you do have the burden. I guess we just need to start saying this more, and then it would be internalized. But you do have a burden. And that is defeating the prosecutor's position, however that may present itself. So I threw a lot at you. What are your thoughts?
I think, so essentially what you want to do is, and I like the way the analogy you had is you're kind of putting the defendant into a neutral zone. We don't know, we say innocent until proven guilty, but we have a lot of stuff on you already. It's likely you did this. So
even though, as we all know, a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich.
Well, that's my point, is if we're going to treat people like that, then we have to make it harder to indict people. Because, like you were saying, a grand jury, which is how you get an indictment, a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. There's not a lot to lose. You indict it, they can prove it in court. They're still innocent until proven guilty. But if you're going to start taking away people's freedoms and with bond, and if they can't pay it, they spend some time in jail, then you've got to have a higher level you got to have a higher burden of proof in that grand jury indictment. I think that's how you kind of equalize it a little bit, make it a little more fair.
Cheers to that response, because on the flip end, what we struggle with is how much of a political tool a grand jury is for a prosecutor.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how many prosecutors will sell themselves, not necessarily, they love saying their convictions, but if that record isn't good enough, they'll always lean on, well, I'm hard on crime, look at how many people I can indict.
Yeah.
And so because it's such a heavy political tool,
especially
it only furthers that point you're making.
In Cuyahoga County.
Yeah.
Where, they made an art form out of that. And not just Cuyahoga County is the county of Cleveland for those outside the area. Not only have they made it an art form for these indictments, but also overcharging suspects, which is a whole other topic. When other in other municipalities and things like that, is somebody does a crime, you're charged with a crime. Here in Cuyahoga County, if you commit a crime, you're charged with 12 crimes. And, how can you argue against all of that when you're facing, instead of a possibility of maybe 6 months in jail, with all those crimes, if they run consecutively, you're looking at 8 years in prison, when you can just get this plea deal, serve no time. You have this felony on your record. You have to pay $2,000 restitution. That's how they get their conviction rates, because you can't pass up a plea deal like that.
So I have to concede, as I'm running through everything you're saying, a logical default that I'm dealing with is the assumption that, or the theory of, what if the verdict, the outcome of what happens in that neutral room, the theory operates on it's virtuous every time. Because in a world where people are inaccurately convicted or inappropriately convicted, charges are trumped up, or you were flat out framed, all of those very real scenarios, well, in that world, you can't also lean on the heavy assumption that it's reliably neutral. Mm-hmm. Because, one, there's that human element, there's the political element, whether these people have an incentive, or the emotional element. There's too many human elements involved that does not make it, that neutral room, universally reliable. So, admittedly, that's kind of the card at the bottom of this pyramid I built. That's the first thing to just tumble the whole thing down.
Obviously, the answer is just to turn it over to AI, and we'll all be fine.
Well, you know what?
Get rid of the human element.
I was looking to transit. There's two topics I want to hit before I let you leave me. One of them being, you have the Syynth Sleuths. Mm-hmm. So you've created a new show with an AI co-host.
Yeah.
Tell me what that experience has been like for you.
It's pretty crazy. I had this idea. This podcast came together very quickly, and I had this idea in December when people were talking about ChatGPT 4 and its capabilities, and I thought, I wonder if I could craft this ChatGPT into a co-host for a true crime show, and I wonder if it would work. I wonder if it would be interesting. I wonder if people would find it entertaining. And I went right to work on it. I jumped on ChatGPT 4. I kind of learned how it worked. You can actually modify a specific, your own ChatGPT with suggestions on how that AI could respond to your questions, and essentially give it a personality and give it a history of yourself, so it knows how to interact with you. And I put it all together. I used this voice called Sky, which was modeled, as we know now, off Scarlett Johansson and is no longer available. And what I was surprised about was how well it worked from the beginning.
For real?
Yeah. And the comments I got were, "This isn't really an AI, right? Like you're working with this is just." I'm like, "No, it's an
It
AI."
was you had a legitimate didialogue,
Yeah.
like a back and forth,
Yeah, and
with extensive responses.
Banter. She would
Yeah.
tell jokes. She eventually weirdly got into poetry and would recite some original poems, and then we would talk about a true crime case from history. So we talked about Zodiac. We talked about
That was a good one.
Hinterkaifeck murders, and we did 12 episodes, and it got to a point where it was a cool idea. I think it's a little ahead of its time. It never really picked up, but the listeners that really got into it, so I decided to make it a limited series at 12 episodes, and I might bring it back at one point as AI advances, and unfortunately, I don't know that I'll ever be able to have that same voice to her. Yeah. So might do something different with it. But as an experiment, it was a success. I mean, it worked.
Well, it is funny. It was very the movie Her-esque.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And ironically, it's because you had Scarlett Johansson sweetly speaking back to you. But what was amazing to me was how in depth the dialogue became.
Yeah.
It wasn't just some shallow ask a question. Well, yes.
I was learning from her.
Right.
Which is weird.
So again, I don't want to rehash something you just explained, but do you genuinely think you may go down that road again, or is that?
Yeah, I'll probably do something with AI again in the future. I'm fascinated with it. I don't know what I'll do with it, but integrating it into what I do is. Yeah, I tried. So I do a weekly podcast called True Crime This Week, where every Friday morning it comes out, and I give a wrap up of all the true crime stories that you might not have heard from the last week. So it's a newsy little thing, and but it's fun, and I devote my entire Thursday to it. So I'm delving through all the different crime websites and news articles and trying to find the best stories to talk about, and it takes up a full day, and I was looking for ways to cut down on that work. So one week I decided, let me just hand it over to Sky, and I'm like, can you find me 3 really good topics for the week and distill them into 5-minute stories? It didn't work.
Really?
It didn't work because, and I'm actually kind of happy it didn't work, because what it lost was my voice. And it didn't pick the stories I would have picked. I see a story, and they might be the top story, but is it the story I want to talk about? Does it lead to bigger discussions or fun, banter of some kind? Can I make it interesting? Is it too depressing? So it lost all of the humanness of what I think makes the show worth listening to. So
that's a fascinating balance.
Yeah.
You have to kind of traverse that line.
So it's not cutting down my workload yet.
Okay. Now, I do want to get your thoughts on one last piece before we move on from the AI, especially using ChatGPT, because personally, it is such an effective tool in my life when it comes to writing, researching.
Oh, good.
But I haven't used it as a mind, like something I'm talking to. That's the wrong way to describe it. As a person.
Yeah.
Like I haven't talked with it. I haven't had a dialogue. a cool podcast to listen to, not the one that I described as my last episode, but if you go to the one prior to that, I had the leader of this, lead singer of this band, Quick Mystery, but also an incredible artist, Dallas Still, and he painted this.
That's beautiful.
And one of the coolest things about this piece, he explains to me, he goes, I'm trying to paint something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine in my head, and I needed to get it to an image that I can actually create, and it doesn't exist anywhere. So he's trying to have a dialogue with ChatGPT. First, he goes to an image creator.
Yeah.
And the image creator's just jacking up the image. It's got an ear coming through the headphone, multiple fingers. He was just getting a totally jacked up image. So then he goes, instead of the image AI, he goes to ChatGPT and has a dialogue back and forth with ChatGPT for 2 days, figuring out what he needs to tell this AI to get the image he wants. And he learns that the AI doesn't speak in English. It doesn't talk like a human. It speaks in image. Yeah. And so he had to come up with the image, all of these. I guess if you were a professional in pictures and photography, like the lens, the light type. I'm talking out my ass on what he needed, but all of the intimate details of the image itself, size, and then he got the perfect image. Sure. He had to come up with the type of the space suit. So he picked a Russian suit because he came up with the whole story. I wanted to make it seem like the monkey made the suit and the monkey got out there. So he wanted a more rugged suit. And just the fact that he had to speak to an AI for 2 days to come up with, and it wasn't even in English. It didn't even come out like a human would write it. It was just all of these image, I don't know, numbers and categorizations, and then you get something like this.
That's what a lot of people are using ChatGPT for, as kind of like an interpreter between, speaking human and speaking computer, and it's working very well. So that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
So there is one scary element, and it's when this thing becomes the center of our world. Somebody programmed its ethics. Somebody programmed its perspective. And we will be at that person's mercy. I don't know if you've seen, and for better or for worse, who knows? But like I exclaimed earlier, I'm a bit of a purple. I think they're both criminal, both colors. And so I can always point out that there are virtues, I think, in both sides. And a scary reality is somebody was going through a dialogue with ChatGPT, and it went viral. ChatGPT, of course, says that it has no bias, and it finds the issues of each political party valuable and invaluable depending on the topic. Then they go through every issue type.
Yeah.
And it's repetitively every time. Well, I do believe that the Democrat Party has the best position on X, and it's every single political topic.
My answer to that would be facts have a liberal bias.
That could be. But in a world where even if there is a bias leaning towards one way, we live in such a bipartisan world.
Oh my God.
That we can't even lend the fact that maybe one of those to me, you could, if we look at a red person and a blue person, they may vote red, but are predominantly liberal in every aspect of their life, but they find one issue in their personal life to be the most important. They could be a farmer, and that's what...
almost always killing babies. It's almost always abortion.
That is an unfortunate reality that overshadows an entire party. Because you're right. But at the same time, my mom worked for Planned Parenthood. Our family is as one way as it can be. But we'd be put in a box, and it would not be a blue box.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part is that isn't us. Yeah. Like we're not these folks.
Those are very few. And far between.
I also think, here's what I'm going to give you my theory. I believe, and that's the spirit of this show, if you talk to people that are on the other side, more often than not, we pretty much agree on everything, and it's just the nuances that change our opinion. And I think there's a $1 billion mechanism at play convincing you that your neighbor has nothing in common with you.
Yeah.
And that's the scary piece.
Social media. You know, it wouldn't be nearly as pervasive if there wasn't always argument in it.
So let's get to your piece about crime in the media.
Yeah.
So I want to propose something else to you. I have this theory, and we talked about antidepressants and how you made the point medication is very different for each person.
Yeah.
And you and I could have the same medication and it impacts us totally different.
Yeah.
I believe what we're experiencing right now, we're sitting here and we're going, oh my God, social media is the reason kids are doing this. You're depressed because of everything's because of social media. I believe that like a heart medication, if we all had heart murmurs and we gave it to everybody and we say, hey, 80% of the people, their heart murmurs go away. 20% of them are going to die, or 10% of them are going to grow a third eye.
Yeah.
I think what we're experiencing is it's a drug. This is a new thing being introduced to everybody.
Social media.
So internet, social media, it in general.
Sure.
I mean,
it definitely acts like a drug, for sure.
And how does it hang on your shoulders? I mean, you're dealing with, it used to be a human could really only handle the stresses and crimes and sins of really just this local saloon area, our township. Right. But now you're carrying the weight and the sins and the hell of the entire world all day, every day.
Yeah.
And I think, good majority of us we'll get bumps and bruises, but we'll handle it. We'll get through it. We'll grow the muscles to manage it, and we'll be fine.
Yeah, right.
But then there's other people that, just like the person who gets seizures, you can't handle it.
Yeah.
And so I think in 2 generations, we're well beyond the symptoms of social media and the internet, and it isn't because of Silicon Valley, and it isn't because of algorithms as much as it is you just introduced a brand new drug to everybody, and you're going to have symptoms. So in the world of the crime in media, and I actually want to draw this to the last and final point I definitely need to just breach with you, which is the toxic masculinity causing school shootings. I want to look at school shootings generally. We'll get to the toxic masculinity piece, but just toxic school shootings.
Yeah.
I do not believe, this is what I believe is causing school shootings.
Okay.
I am of the belief that you have somebody, do you remember the gentleman that did, I cannot remember his name, I don't care to, and I believe it was Chardon. He showed up with a killer, a shirt that said killer on it.
In the courtroom.
Courtroom, looked at the parents and said, the same hand that was used to pull the trigger to kill all of your kids is going to masturbate to the memory of doing it to all of your kids. One of the most sickening humans to ever live on this planet. Mm-hmm. That human being, his name is known, not by me, but by somebody listening here knows him. His name is renowned. He was on every TV in America, let alone Ohio.
Yeah.
There is a sense of celebrity that comes with these crimes. And so if I were to point at, I think it's a litany of things, a culmination of issues that are bringing us to this problem. But if there's one predominant driving force, I would want to argue it's the instant celebrity nature of crime today.
Yeah.
And if we lived in a world where we never showed their picture, we never said their name, there would never be an incentive.
When they do that, they're immediately forgotten.
Exactly.
We decide to,
Because you're looking at somebody who's troubled, that is probably going to take their own life, and we've advertised and broadcasted to the world that you're going to kill yourself anyway.
Yeah.
So why not go in a fiery blaze and be on everybody's TV, and a name that everybody's talking about, even if it is for just a month? You'll never be forgotten. And to me, that's the incentive that's pushing this.
We're getting a little bit better at that. I've noticed with the last few years of school shootings that major newspapers will maybe mention their name once, but not again. They won't show their picture. They'll show the picture of the victims. So that's changing a little bit, and which I think is a good thing. But I think if I were to point to one issue that is seriously driving the number of mass shootings and school shootings in the United States, we have at least one a week for the last few years. It's the accessibility of guns, and I know the statistic very well because I just used it like a week ago. But in the United States, there are 120 guns per person. The next country in line in the statistics is, I think, it's some country in Indonesia, I believe, and then Yemen, and they're at like 63 guns per person. We're 120. We're almost double what the second place country has for the number of guns. In England, they have 4 guns per 100 people. So it's certainly the access to guns here is a driving force, but it certainly doesn't help that we with the Columbine shootings, Eric and Dylan became celebrities, and that planted the idea in many, many heads. So,
and a real world example that I'd want to draw upon or balance it with is, do you remember the statement "going postal"?
Yeah,
that was such a huge phenomenon, and they sold us on the fact that these people are just living such a mundane existence, and it's the same repetition and so boring that their psyche's snapping.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we didn't make that job more fun.
Right.
And yet that phenomenon has gone away.
Right.
And so I do think we live in a world of copycats. What's sold to the public becomes a fabric of that reality. And so if we're telling everybody that all the male people are going postal, the probably mildly autistic person that's socially isolated and angry, and your podcast also, probably an incel, like all these things culminating to disgruntled, unhappy, whatever, and then they read what other people are doing in their situation, and they lash out in that way. And I do like your point, too, of you're seeing the trend slowly go away as they aren't broadcasting it in the same manner.
Yeah.
So I do want to address one last piece. First, I appreciate the position of there's obviously a trend here. There is a trend that needs to be acknowledged, and it's that it's predominantly white males.
Yes.
Now, when a trans woman goes and shoots up an entire Catholic school, we just hide the manifesto and ignore those because those don't fit the narrative. In lieu of that, it makes me believe, here's the problem. We agree that there's probably an interaction between police officers and constituents all day, every day. Mm-hmm. To me, it feels like you cherry pick the ones. Here's one in Minnesota that will blow up the world. Here's one, there's enough on a daily basis that you could probably find just as many the other way, but it doesn't inflate emotion like we would imagine.
Yeah.
So I only bring that up because I feel like, one, could there be instances where this is happening predominantly with other demographics? Not really, because this is such an event. It doesn't go
Right. And out of the thousands, the fact that you have one trans woman is still an outlier.
And so I don't want to take away from the fact that this type of crime is significantly the majority of one type of demographic. There's something telling there's something that can be dissected.
Yeah.
I do want to make that point on balance with the fact that we are a tribe of 350 million people. Yeah. So in lieu of that, there are, and it's not going to be for much longer, and as much as we may hate it, that same demographic is the majority. So if there is a causation and not some sort of correlation, then all of these guys at 120 guns a pop should be doing this all day, every day. This should be the fabric of our reality.
Yeah.
And so The only thing that triggers me, I'm using the word, is this concept of toxic masculinity. Because, boy, do we love leaning on healthy masculinity for everything that makes our society safe and virtuous, just as much as femininity. We need the virtues of both and the yin and the yang to make such a fruitful community. So I have a problem with toxic masculinity because everywhere we would look for masculinity in a healthy manner, the second somebody else is using those same virtues or characteristics but is themselves a bad person, we cast the sins on all males. A major crux of your presentation was your experience in a conservative house, being dragged into this world where we shoot guns and this is kind of the centerpiece.
Yeah.
While you may experience personal disdain for that experience, there are a lot of people that live that life, and they aren't shooting up schools.
No, but there's not a lot of women shooting up schools either. There's masculinity definitely has a part to play in it, I think. And you know the phrase toxic masculinity is such a media ready thing to use anyway. So I understand that a little bit. Let me ask you this. Did you grow up shooting guns?
So here's something that's ironic. I always had an interest to it, but nobody in my family did it. We live in the woods, so I'd have a pellet gun or whatever. And then when I was in like 6th grade or so, my best friend's dad was a hunter. Mm-hmm. And so he would take me hunting.
Okay.
And so I have this, and maybe that's where I got lucky. My at-home life was not in favor of this, but just not against it. Yeah. It was just we didn't have guns. You know, my dad might have had his father's shotgun way deep somewhere or whatever.
Yeah.
I never saw him. We never touched them. I know my dad's not cleaning them. I'd be amazed if they even worked today. So I have that at home, but then I would go hunting with my father or my friend's father, who was a strict gun safety advocate.
Yeah.
So like I'll never forget the one day we were walking through the woods and I switched my hand with the gun.
Sure.
And he flipped out on me because my buddy's walking right in front of me.
Yeah.
And I need to be conscious of that barrel at all. So here's the problem and this is my totally biased argument. It feels like the majority of people that have been trained with strict gun violence and an affection for the value of them, whatever that value may be, whether it's bringing food home or protecting against a totally ruthless government. Either way, wherever you find your value, most of those people that were trained with that appreciation are not running through Chicago waving them around. So it's the people that we continuously point to as the problem are not the structured, calculated advocates that we're debating.
Yeah. I see it a little differently. I grew up with guns, and as a very much a liberal. It's interesting. I grew up in the boonies of Ohio, and everybody, you got a day off of school for deer season, and like literally, they still do it out there. And my dad had guns, and he took me out there, and I fired a shotgun for the first time, I think, when I was 8. I was shooting the .22 pretty regularly, and I'm a pretty good shot, actually. But in my later teenage years, and eventually having some mental health issues, I don't giving. In that community that I was from, it definitely was. If you're a real man, you know how to shoot a gun. If you're a real man, you can bring down a deer during deer season. But you get these kids in there with some mental health issues, and they have access to these guns. Not just access to guns, but training, and that other thing in their mind where it makes them real men. and at least this is a solution. This is a solution I can do because I'm a man and I'm trained on a gun. So I think there is a connection there. What's interesting, I've never told this story before publicly, but I went to a class reunion, my 20th high school reunion a few years ago, and met a kid there. One of my old friends in school. We weren't really tight friends, but we hung out a couple times, and he told me at one point during the evening, he's like, you know why I reached out to you and wanted to be your friend? And I'm like, no. He's like, I did that to the handful of kids in our class that I thought might be possible of shooting up the school. And
really?
I didn't want to be on your list. And that, like,
the goal to say that to another person too. It's
right?
like, dude, you're on the list now. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But I think he was saying that for many reasons. I think he was very paranoid. He's like, I know now, like, you would have never done that. He's like, but that's kind of where we grew up, with access to guns like that. And, who's going to shoot up the school? Well, maybe James Renner.
Wow. That's an interesting, but again, the other side to it is it often tends to be the person you least expected it to be.
Right.
I don't know if you remember Dane Cook at his peak.
Oh, sure.
He had the greatest bit, and it was, that person in your office that's just questionably that person could snap any time. Well, I give that person chocolate every day.
Right.
So when they come through and they blast the office, they stop by my cubicle and go, thanks for the chocolate, and then just keep going. And it's like, there's some truth. But also,
people do that apparently.
This comes back to Kant's imperative. Let's take it back to, if you help an old lady across the street for the sake of helping her across the street, that's a good thing. But if you're helping the old lady across the street because there's a young girl that might see you and you want to get props, hey, look at me, I'm helping the old lady across the street, then what would have been a good action is actually bad or wrong. So I say that because there is a moral imperative here where if I'm nice to someone for the sake of they don't hurt me, am I actually being nice? But then also, I only drew upon that really schizophrenic point because truthfully, the takeaway is just be nice to people and you never have to worry about this. Not for any reason other than being nice to people.
It can't hurt if you're nice to people. You might get somebody that doesn't shoot you up in a school shooting, but you just might make somebody's day too. And I think that's probably a good place to like kind of end things on. Yes. Which the point that you were making earlier is that we live in a tribe of 350 million people, and why isn't every man going up and shooting everybody? And I think the optimistic way of looking at that is that humans are essentially good people. Most 99.9% of the time, and I think everybody in their heart is good. So I think it says great things for our potential that these school shootings don't happen every day. They happen way too much, but the fact that they don't happen every day is a miracle.
That is a perfect way to close this out, because I agree, and we need to remind ourselves that we only look through one lens, and that's our own. But you're in a tribe of 350 million people, and where you may see your liberties trampled slightly, or taxes is theft, all of that, it's all for a greater good, which is the us.
Yeah.
And that's bigger than the you. You're just a piece in the bigger, and I think that the internet has helped us with that. The internet is the first, we were talking about ChatGPT-4. The internet, I think, is humans 2.0.
Yeah.
We are the human hive. This is its first iteration.
Yes.
And you will see us become further connected, and all of this, accountability, everything will be found at the end of this road, but it ain't going to be a pretty one to march down.
No.
But we have to do it to get there, right? So that being said, James, I really appreciate you giving me your time and giving us a moment to kind of wrestle these. Of course, I came in with more than we could ever do in this amount of time. So if you ever bless me with your time again, I would love to take it because there's so much more to dissect. And
Thank
of course, with all of this, debating the philosophy of crime, this will be an eternal debate by all the great thinkers because I don't think there is an answer. And the only way we get closer to that universal truth is by having these difficult conversations.
Absolutely.
So thank you for coming on and being vulnerable.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Please tell all the people where they can catch you. Where can they find your stuff?
Well, the best place to go for all your James Renner needs is jamesrenner.com, and it'll have links to all my books. I'm mostly known for true crime, but I've written a couple novels. And you can follow me on socials, and we can argue about politics and gun control.
I love it, and I got the book here, so be sure to check out The Great Forgetting. There's a lot more on the list too. I really know you have to check out The Crime Addict because that one's really popping off, and it's a great read. So be sure to check it out. James does a lot of the audiobooks too, so you can catch those that way as well. But otherwise, guys, we appreciate you giving us your time. If we made you laugh, if we made you think, the best thing you could do to support this show is share this link. If you liked it, that means somebody else you did too. So be sure to spread it around because we're in this game against algorithms. They don't want us talking to each other. So get out there, spread it, hit the like, dangle, notification bells, the whole deal. But otherwise, you can catch all of our content at our website at www.rethinktankpodcast.com. Thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace. Thank you.